Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. So in today's episode, we are going to be making a very small little casket. I have mentioned in previous live streams that ultimately one day I want to make my own casket on camera for you guys. And that's going to be a huge and involved project. But this is kind of like a miniature version to sort of like understand how do these things come together. And I'll explain to you how this episode even came about because it was not in my initial plan. Last month, I was midway through doing the oil painting of Mr. Biggles and myself, and I was really emotional about it. And then I think at the midway mark, a good friend of mine lost her very best friend, her little furry companion that had been with her for about 17 years. And I was talking to her and I felt so sad. I was like, well, let me make you like a casket. And she was like, no, you don't have to. And I was like, no, really, it's going to be so easy. Which I should never say things like that. I don't know what I was thinking. And in addition to that, I thought I had the time to make this off camera as just like a little favor on the side. And it's been sinking in slowly, but I'm beginning to realize I don't have enough time to do extra little bonus favors unless it's going to end up being an episode. So that's kind of what's happening. It got started already just because I wasn't filming what was going on and my captive was actually helping me cut out some of the pieces and assemble it. But we just kind of went back, refilmed a whole bunch of stuff, and I think it's going to come together really well. Something else I should mention is normally with these episodes, I film something in the beginning, I film something in between. Like all of these talking monologues are done sort of throughout the project. This one, because of the way it came together, I ended up filming everything at the end. So now I kind of know how much work went into this thing. But that being said, it's actually something I am kind of ridiculously proud of and is kind of right near the top of the list of the things that I am personally really impressed that I was able to do. So I'm excited for you to see it sort of come together from nothing, and let's begin. I taped several pieces of paper together to create a very large sheet, folded that into quarters, and now I'm only going to sketch out a quarter of the oval. I'm doing this because once I actually cut it out and open it up, it will be a perfect oval template. This is kind of a tricky part to explain, but essentially that center circle, the smallest circle, is going to be the opening or vacant, empty spot of the casket. And then all of these other sort of lines that I'm drawing are going to be varying widths of this casket, starting from the base going up. And that way you get kind of a lot of dimension when you look at it from the side. And then obviously you'll be keeping a consistent shape on the inside. All right, so now that we have our templates kind of cut out, we had gone to this really great lumber yard and found this beautiful cherry wood in several different depths. And we had large planks cut into lengths of, I think, 27 inches. Got them home, glued them together side by side so you end up with kind of like a sheet. And now we are ready to lay these pieces down, sketch out these outlines, and then cut them out with a jigsaw. And that way you have all of these beautiful shapes, and then you just kind of sandwich them together with clamps and wood glue, and that will essentially create the shape of our casket. This part kind of varies a lot because sometimes these pieces will glue together perfectly, and sometimes they start bowing out a little bit, and it takes a little finagling to get them to lay exactly flat. But once they are perfect, you wipe down all of the excess glue, and then I like to leave them to rest for at least, I want to say, an hour before unclamping. Once you feel pretty sure that they're completely set, you can then clamp them down, trace out the line that you want, and then start cutting them out with a jigsaw. These layers are going to make up the lid of the casket. So it's 3 layers. The bottom layer does have that circle cut out just because I want to put some fabric inside there at the end. But the top 2 layers I'm going to be doming out. And so I'm obviously not going to be cutting out the centers of those. The only layers that have the centers cut out are essentially the middle of the sandwich that we're making. And here is the base piece of our casket that my very handy captive was kind enough to cut out for me and start gluing together, which we unfortunately did not capture on film. Here's where you can kind of see where those dimensions are coming together on the outside, yet it's remaining consistent on the inside. I'm using a belt sander to make sure all of the edges line up perfectly before I start creating that dome shape on the top. I am sure that somebody with more woodworking experience than me could figure out a much faster way to do this. Perhaps I didn't have the proper tools, but I tried a whole bunch of different things to get this to go as quickly and smoothly as possible. I attempted to use a router for a little bit, and to be totally honest, it just kind of scared me, so I went back to just using the Dremel. It took a while to get done, but once it was finished, I was really happy with the end result. Okay, so now we're going to sketch out a really fun design on top of this lid. And before I get into that, I'm going to show you this amazing toolkit that I got, I think at Joann Fabric. It was like $75, which was kind of a splurge, but it holds all of my art supplies, and I've been using it now for probably, I want to say 4 months, and it's been like game changing because I get to keep every single sort of like little knickknack and all of the little things that you need all in one place. And so I've got like my pencils here and all sorts of like fun, silly things. My paintbrushes, really kind of like everything you can think of fits in this thing. And I don't know why, I just thought it would be kind of fun to show you how I'm currently organizing all of my supplies. And if you wanted to pick one of these up, they only come in pink, which I like pink, but it also would have been nice if they maybe came in a few different colors. This is called a, let's see, Creative Options, and I looked them up and you can still find them on Amazon, so you don't necessarily have to go into a Joann's. Now we are ready to sketch out our design and make something really fun and unique. I'm starting this by creating a 1-inch grid across the entire lid and marking where the center is so I can space out my letters in a way that keep them balanced and make sense. So it's kind of funny, but I probably have the worst handwriting of anyone you have ever met. And for some very strange reason, I'm able to, if I take enough time, sketch out really cool typography. But if I have to quickly write a note or something, it looks like something that, like a disabled possum wrote. So, yeah. So the name of this kitty is Aleister, and it is such an unusual name and it's spelled so strangely that I had to keep going back and double checking how I was doing this, just because the very last thing I wanted to do was create a beautiful piece of art with a glaring misspelling on the front of it. Aleister's mom is the world famous burlesque performer Dita Von Teese, who is a lovely friend of mine and an avid cat lover. And they had spent so much of their life together on tour across the world, going to these big, beautiful events with like sumptuous curtains and ostrich feathers. And I just wanted to personalize this lid in a way that was representative of the time that they had spent together. This is what's known as subtractive sculpting, meaning you can't add anything to it, so you're just removing things. And it's one of those things that seems really scary, but if you are incredibly patient and you have a really good books on tape to listen to, and a whole lot of time on your hands, it's absolutely achievable that you can make something super beautiful and special. So, when you're working on a project that's going to take such a long time, honestly, I spent about a month and a half on this project. It's so helpful to listen to audiobooks because, for one, you're already going to be protecting your ears, so you might as well be listening to something. And the two books that I was listening to were both by Anne Rule. The first one was Green River Running Red, and it's about the Green River serial killer. It was so fascinating. And then the second one was Dead by Sunset, which is captivating and infuriating, and I would recommend either of those titles. I used a really expensive, fancy cherry wood for this project, which is super. It's not as hard to work with as that god awful zebra wood that I that I made that witch's broom out of last year, but it is still a very hard wood, and it does burn through these expensive Dremel tips pretty quickly. So I would say if you're on a budget, you might want to go with a softer wood, and that will sort of allow these tips to last longer and will keep your price down. had this idea to sculpt in like a rope effect around the base of the lid and also on the base of the casket. So there was going to be two in total. I thought it was going to go really quickly and easily, and I found out I was super mistaken. Each rope on their own took, I want to say, a day and a half. So to do both, it took a total of 3 solid days to sculpt out, which I personally feel like it was worth it just because it adds so much elegance and character to the casket. I wanted to create these column sort of strips that wrapped around the center of the casket. And if I could rewind time, I would have done this before gluing the pieces together, because the fact that I had to sort of etch in between all of these little crevices was a step I wouldn't have had to do had I done that. We are now ready to move on to stains and varnishes. There's a lot of different products you can use, and I personally always go back to my tried and true. I really love clear shellac and also amber shellac. The amber shellac really gives wood kind of like an orangey richness, which some woods don't need and others really do need if you want something to look really old-fashioned and kind of, I don't know, expensive, I want to say. Something else I'm going to have to be careful with this box in particular is because of all of the etching, there's going to be weird little textures all over the wood that if you were to just go in with a straight stain, the stain would most likely grab onto any of those tiny little flaws or mistakes and make them jump out at you, which I don't want. So I'm actually going to coat it in a very thin coat of the clear shellac first, just to create a protective barrier, and then that way you really get to see all of the natural sort of shadows and highlights of the wood. Something else you want to keep in mind is whenever you're doing a woodworking project, always have scraps of the wood that you're not going to use on hand. So when you get to the stage, you can sample and test all of these things just to make sure you're going to get a result that you're super happy with. So with that said, I think we're ready to get going on the staining and the varnishing. This is a great example to show that the side that has that rough cut, when you applied the stain, got so much darker than the flat surface that was smooth. I felt like that first layer of staining got a touch too dark to the point that I really couldn't see that there was this beautiful textured wood underneath. So I'm going to remove a little bit of it while leaving sort of a border around the letters and the stars and shapes. And then I'm going to go in with a stain and just layer it until it is exactly the color I want. To show off all of the details I sculpted, I went over everything with a really dark stain and then immediately wiped up each little section as I worked. And that way, all of those cracks and grooves got really dark and aged. I absolutely love getting to the stage where you start applying the hinges and hardware. For me, it always just feels like you have a couple pieces of decorative wood until you get to this stage. And then when it really comes together and it opens and closes, it feels suddenly like this real thing. And I would say it's one of my very favorite parts of a project like this. Always, always, always pre-drill when working on something decorative because the very last thing you want is the wood to split when you've already done all of this work. Now we are ready to line the casket. Dita was nice enough to send me a yard of this really beautiful kind of silvery gray satin. Her entire bedroom was done with this fabric, and it was where she spent so much time with her little kitty. So it seemed really appropriate to line the casket with something that he was already familiar with. So in case I didn't have enough, I did run to the hobby store with my mom to pick up as many different kinds of fabrics as I could to sort of fill in the gaps in case I sort of ran out of this, which I ended up using nearly all of it. I mentioned I'm filming these monologues after the project was done. So this is literally all that's left after using an entire yard of fabric. Something else I did while I was at the hobby store was picked up ribbons and buttons and anything to add like a little bit of sparkle and fun. One thing I picked up, well, I almost didn't, but it's this kind of ridiculous little curtain tassel. I was looking at it and I'm kind of like a raccoon where I'm just like, oh, sparkles. So I was looking at this and I was like, ooh, and my mom was like, that's for drapes. That's not going to work on a casket. And I was like, how do you know? Maybe this casket will have tassels. And she was basically saying I was nuts. And like I said before, the casket is done. I know what it looks like. And this didn't make any sense. So in case my mom was watching, you were right. So with that said, let me show you how that all came together. And it's pretty much one of the last finishing touches. I knew the moment I pulled out the fabric and the sewing shears that it was just going to be a few seconds before Professor Poof showed up to party. When applying the lining on something like this, you don't want to use any like glues or adhesives simply because they will break down over time and that fabric will separate. So I'm using an air-powered staple gun to apply the lining, and anywhere else that I need something to really stick, I'm either going to be stapling, nailing, or sewing my pieces together just so that they hold up. I'm padding the bed of this casket with the very softest foam I could find and just sewing a layer of that silver satin onto it. I wanted to create a really fluffy sort of ruched piping that goes along the top of that base padding. And the way I'm going to do that is to essentially create a tubular pillow that's sort of reminiscent of a pool noodle. And a really quick, simple way to do that is to just sew every few inches and leave a bunch of gaps. That way you can go in and just stuff with your finger some polyfill, and it's a really simple way to fill this out. To create the ruched lining that's going to go over that tubular pillow, I cut out double the length of the satin that I needed, sewed that together, and then went around and took elastic and cut it to the exact measurement that I needed. And then I started sewing those two pieces together, stretching out the elastic as I sewed. And then the moment you let go, it instantly gathers in a really beautiful way. Pulling this through was such a challenge, but I used one of those long metal grabbers, and it took a few tries, but eventually worked. There's a product called Fray Check that you can pick up at any sewing supply store, and it is wonderful for essentially capping off these edges and stopping them from fraying out. One of Dita's bedrooms had this beautiful silver gathering on the ceiling, and I wanted to recreate that for Aleister's casket just so he would be resting peacefully in a surrounding that he was familiar with. Because I like doing absolutely everything to the max, I decided to hand stitch a very small Canadian smocked pillow for Aleister, which honestly only took me the morning and wasn't nearly as difficult as doing one of the larger ones that I featured earlier this year. So this is the finished casket. It's so beautiful. It's so sad that it's gonna go in the ground, but the truth is, like I mentioned, I'm gonna make my own casket and I wanna be spending eternity in something beautiful and fancy. And if ever there was a little kitty that deserved this, I think Aleister it goes with his life and it seems to make sense for him. And the truth is, I will make more magical pieces of art. So, with all of that said, I am on the brink of making this big move. So things are going to get kind of funny for like the next month and a half while I work on all of these things. We are still going to be doing live streams and I'm going to be catching you up on the things that are happening while I make this giant, amazing life change. So stay tuned for all of that fun stuff and I will see you very soon.